that subdivide responsibilities for incarceration within those categories, across disciplinary boundaries that divide the law from criminology, from sociology, from political science and anthropology, and across subspecialties in immigration and criminal justice, and across the boundaries that too frequently separate theory from practice. So this is hopefully going to be a dialogue that will help us cross a lot of borders and challenge a lot of boundaries. Our lineup includes academic experts on issues of criminal punishment, on issues of correction and immigration detention. It includes present and former government officials who are involved in criminal justice administration and in the immigration system. It involves attorneys who have litigated detention and punishment issues, and representatives from various nonprofits and community organizations who are working at the heart of these matters. It also involves a federal appeals court judge who daily confronts challenges related to large numbers of unrepresented non-citizens in our court system. Our audience will be diverse too. From the RSVP list, I see that we can count on having academics here, lawyers, judges, activists, government officials, and students. So I think the resulting dialogue will be invigorating and hopefully boundary breaking. I wanted to give my thanks to Human Rights First for bringing the event here. I'm really excited that they have done so. And in particular, I want to give thanks to Ruthie Epstein, who has worked tirelessly with me and with a lot of you to help coordinate. And also wanted to extend my thanks to Helen Hartman and Catherine Plummer, who are here working hard even as we speak, and to Eleanor Acer, the Director of Human Rights First Refugee Protection Program, who's here to participate in today's dialogue with us. So thanks to all of you for coming and for being here with us. I also need to extend special thanks to Dean Chemerinsky and to the law school for their co-sponsorship. Dean Chemerinsky is a tireless advocate, litigator, and social justice worker, as well as a dean. And so it's always a delight to be able to participate in an event with him. And I also want to extend thanks to UCI's Center for Research on Immigration, Population, and Public Policy, and especially Frank Bean for his support of this program. And finally, I couldn't walk away from the podium without thanking Phil Sayers, who's out there now working, who's done tons of work on the ground. And he also supplied the initial spark that brought this conference here, so thanks to him. I have a quick word to say about CLE for the attorneys in the audience. There is CLE credit available, 7.5 hours available if you're here for the whole day. The sign-up sheet is on the front table. There's a certificate of attendance on the front table that you should take with you for your personal records. If you stay for less than the full 7.5 hours, you should modify the certificate of attendance accordingly, or I can modify it for you. Take only the CLE that you have fulfilled in accordance with your ethical obligations. And finally, I ask that you fill out evaluations for the program. If you are getting CLE credit, that helps us to retain our CLE, our ability to give CLE credit in the future. So fill out evaluations and return those to the desk where the evaluations are, and that's going to be helpful to us. So thanks to all of you for coming. We look forward to having more individuals join us as the day progresses. So we'll kind of leave the back free for people to slip in and out as they need to. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers, and I'll turn the mic back to Ruthie for a moment, and then to our speakers and panelists. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all again for joining us today. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to Dean Chemerinsky and the University of California at Irvine School of Law for hosting us today. We're also thrilled to be hosted by student groups, two student groups, the Immigration and International Migration Law Society and the Orange County Human Rights Association. And we're also very grateful for the support of the Center for Research on Immigration Research and Public Policy, which is Frank Bean's research center. Jennifer Chacón and Phil Sayers have both been tremendous partners in putting this event together here at UCI. So thank you again to Jennifer and for Phil, who, as Jennifer mentioned, is outside working. And finally, I'd like to thank, most of all the speakers who are here today, generously contributing their time and their expertise to this important conversation. I'd like to give you all a quick introduction to Human Rights First, for those of you who are less familiar with our organization. And we also work on a range of issues. You may know us from one issue we work on, but not another. We are a US-based human rights organization. We're committed to advocating for US leadership on human rights around the world, as well as for a commitment in the U.S. government to adhering to human rights standards here at home. We have an office in New York, where I'm from, and we also have an office in Washington, D.C. We work on a range of human rights issues, advocating for U.S. leadership in protecting human rights defenders around the world, in preventing genocide, mass atrocities, and protecting refugees who have been forced to flee persecution. Here in the U.S. as well, we work in partnership with U.S. law firms to provide pro bono representation to indigent refugees and asylum seekers in the U.S. asylum and immigration system, and we advocate for asylum and migration policies that are consistent with U.S. human rights commitments. And that work is very much informed by our client work with our asylum seeker clients. Our expertise on U.S. immigration detention specifically stems from our experience representing immigration detainees, conducting legal orientation presentations or Know Your Rights presentations in detention centers, and visiting countless jails and detention centers across the country over the last 20 years. I myself have visited 18 detention facilities in the past 3 years, which I am proud of. I don't think many people outside the government can say that, and it's been a tremendous source of information for me to be able to see what's actually happening inside detention facilities. Most recently, we issued a report almost a year ago on immigration detention called Jails and Jumpsuits. You should have seen the executive summary out on the table, so I encourage you to take a look at that for an overview of the system itself and the work that Human Rights First has been doing on immigration detention. A few housekeeping items in addition to the CLE. We will be, or we are already, recording both audio and video today, just to let you know. Please turn off your cell phones, put them on vibrate. We are as well open to the press, so what you say is on the record in terms of press, unless you tell us otherwise. Every panel will be followed by a Q&A, and if you have questions and want to participate in that conversation, please come down to the mic on either your right or left, and the moderator will manage that process. Restrooms, outside to the left on this level or down the stairs and to the left. And I do want to highlight, there is a, or not highlight, but I'm sorry to say there's a typo in the schedule as listed in the program. The lunchtime talk with Dean Chemerinsky and with Rahul Rajani actually begins at 12:15, not 12:45. And lunch is down the stairs and to the left, and we'll have folks guiding you down there. So you'll make your way down towards the lunch area. The talk will take place there, wrap it up, come back up here for the afternoon. And we will have a reception at the end of the day. Please join us if you make it through, or if you do leave, come back and join us at the reception downstairs. And finally, we are tweeting. If you are a tweet person, a Twitterer, tweet with the hashtag #HRFDetention. That's #HRFDetention hashtag, and that will allow folks across the country following us on Twitter to follow the conversation. A brief overview of our purpose today. We are convening stakeholders in the criminal justice system and the immigration detention system to discuss issues of common concern. And we recognize, in doing that, we recognize the very real differences in the legal underpinnings of both systems, which I think are important to keep in mind, but there are also overlaps in policy practices, as well as the impacted populations in both systems, and certainly knowledge and best practices to be shared. So in pulling folks together, that is our goal. The first thing, I want to run down kind of how the day is going to go. We've made a real effort to ground today's conversation in politics and practices that are, and concerns that are particular to the state of California. So in the early half of the day, we are seeking to identify lessons learned from the realignment process in California that can be applied to immigration detention reform. We're tremendously lucky to have Jim Austin here to give us an overview of the realignment process in California. He knows as much as anyone in the state about this process, so I think we're very fortunate to have him here. And following that overview, we'll have a discussion on alternatives to immigration detention and pretrial services, both of which serve a limited purpose to make sure that folks show up for their hearings and comply with their final decisions on their cases, and both of which can create tremendous cost savings when used appropriately. Also, under the rubric of realignment and prison reform in California, following the conversation on alternatives in pretrial, we will have a conversation on tools for change. We'll have two experts on prison reform, one on immigration detention, in addition to our esteemed moderator, Jim Austin, to examine the different types of tools that can create change in a troubled system of confinement, both externally and from within the system, from within the government. So I am very much looking forward to that conversation because I hope that it will help us figure out what to do. Following that conversation, we'll have our lunchtime discussion with Dean Chemerinsky and Raha Georgiani, who came down from UC Davis to join us today, on mandatory detention and mandatory minimum sentencing. And this is we're bringing together two topics, one topic from each system that I haven't actually seen addressed a lot in the same breath. And the idea is to think about useful parallels or perhaps not useful parallels between the elimination of discretion in mandatory minimum sentencing and three strikes laws in the criminal justice system and the elimination of discretion with mandatory detention laws in the immigration system. Following lunch, we have scheduled a panel on, quote, civil immigration detention. We will be considering the legal and operational distinctions in the conditions appropriate in civil detention in jails and prisons, which are, it's a particularly salient conversation given that DHS and ICE committed 3 years ago to transforming the system of immigration detention by moving it away from a penal model of detention towards something that's more appropriate for individuals held under civil immigration law. Following that panel, we are also fortunate to have Judge Margaret McCune of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals joining us. She will be delivering brief remarks on access to legal counsel for individuals held in ICE custody. And she will be introducing a conversation on what are the needs. Well, no, I believe this event here at UCI is part of a series of similar events that we're holding across the country. We had our last one at the University of Texas at Austin a couple weeks ago. We're going to Arizona State University in a couple weeks, and then to Loyola New Orleans College of Law. And at each event, we are seeking to ground the discussion in issues that are of particular salience in that part of the country, but also looking at these issues from a broad lens as well. I'm really thankful for the tremendous expertise that we'll be bringing together today. I'd like to recognize that ICE is obviously a key player and a stakeholder. They are unfortunately not here. They were at our last event in Texas, but I do want to recognize that their perspective needs to be a part of this conversation in order to move forward on detention reform. We'll absolutely bring the insights and recommendations that come out of today's event to them, and we'll hope to see their participation in such conversations in the future. The goal here is really to strengthen our collective knowledge in the short term and in the longer term. We want to bring back strengthened recommendations for immigration detention reform to Washington. We'll be doing a culminating event in early 2013 in Washington to get all those folks around the table as well. And in addition, we'll do a blueprint that articulates recommendations that have come out of these series of conversations across the country. And less measurable, but just as important, I think, coming out of these events, I hope to see new relationships among all of you, among stakeholders and other interested persons in both systems to find areas of common concern, areas of common ground, common interest in a fair and effective U.S. policy on immigration detention. Finally, I want to give a quick rundown of immigration detention in the United States, especially for the criminal justice folks in the room, and also because I've realized just in the course of these few events that we're putting together that if you're not ensconced in the immigration detention world every day, it's actually quite confusing. And so I want to give some 101. First of all, when we're talking about immigration detention, we're not talking about immigrants who are in jail or prison. It's a separate thing. The category of immigration detention is specifically, as we're talking about it, non-citizens held in ICE custody, and that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is the interior enforcement agency of the Department of Homeland Security. And they're being held by ICE because they are in deportation proceedings or removal proceedings, which means that ICE believes they're not in the U.S. legally, and their cases are moving through the system to determine whether that's in fact the case or whether they do have means of relief or the right to remain in the U.S. under current immigration law. Folks in immigration detention include asylum seekers, they include legal immigrants who overstayed their visas, longtime lawful permanent residents who've been convicted of nonviolent or violent crimes that may make them subject to mandatory detention and deportation under our current U.S. immigration law, as well as longtime residents who don't have documents and recent border crossers. So the population in immigration detention really runs the gamut. ICE is holding these individuals for a very specific and limited purpose, to ensure that they show up for their court hearings and that they comply with any final deportation order. And that is exactly what ICE says is their purpose of detaining individuals in the system. If they have criminal records, they generally have already done their time in the criminal justice system, and that's how it should work. So even if they do have criminal records, legally ICE detention is not supposed to be punitive, that they're not doing their time in ICE detention due to their criminal records. They would have done that in the criminal justice system already. Sorry, I've lost my order here. Okay, I lost my order, but I know what I was going to say, which is a quick overview of actually what the facility, what the system looks like. ICE holds immigrants in a sprawling system of about 250 facilities across the country. They include actual county jails, they include facilities run by private prison contractors, and they include facilities that are run by ICE themselves. ICE has a separate agreement with every single of those facilities, so it's a very challenging system to provide oversight in. This is me speaking, not ICE, obviously. About half of ICE's beds are actually in county jails. ICE in total has 33,400 beds across the country. They detained in fiscal year 2011, the stats that came out most recently, 429,000 people in the course of the year. The average length of stay is about 30 days, but that average is very much skewed downwards because something like a quarter of their detainees are turned around and deported within 2 or 3 days, so way skewed downward. And I think that's it. I think that's it on the overview of immigration detention. And again, I'd like to thank everyone very much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I will invite Jim Austin and the panelists of our first panel to the floor.